and welcome to my first ever Make It Monday craft tutorial video. Today I'm making a birthday card. I had the layout you'd have just seen on the piece of paper. I had a layout of my card design using the dies and the stamp sets that I wanted to use. Next I'm choosing my Distress Oxide ink colours, which I finally settle on Mermaid, Lagoon, Peacock Feathers and Evergreen Bough. Next up I need to do my die cutting. So I have the Lawn Fawn Stitched Rectangle Frames die. I've got the largest one there and that's going to cut out the frame of my base card. Then I'm using a Simon Says stamp Big U die, and I'll use the coordinating stamp set later on in the card. Any noise in the background you hear is my daughter Zoe being a little... She's being very good actually, but her toys are being quite noisy. I've die cut those out. I've put the word back into the negative space because that's going to help me do my ink blending in a moment. First off, I'm using the Mermaid Lagoon, and these were really juicy. I didn't need to go back and stamp my... there's a word for it. Blending tool, that's the word. I didn't need to go and re-ink my blending tool at all. In fact, I had to stamp some of it off because there was just a bit too much colour. I'm just working my way backwards through the colours just so I get a nice good blend and no real harsh lines. It's not difficult with these inks. They are so soft and so smooth, and they just go on fabulously. I'm using the Bristol smooth cardstock. Next up I'm going back to my word die. This is where I decided to have a little bit of texture. So I've used the Mama Elephant's basic background stamp set, the strip of polka dots, to try and add some texture to the top half of the word. It didn't work. You'll see in a minute that once I've added all the other colours on and done my ink blending, that it's just sort of merged into it all and it doesn't really stand out at all. So I'm going in there with the peacock feathers and making sure I dab some off, because as soon as I touch it to the cardstock it's just so juicy. By putting the die cut back into the negative space, it means I can just go at it at my normal speed. If I had the word out on its own, I'd have to be very careful with the way I blended to make sure I didn't scrunch up the edges of the letters. Moving on to the water, I'm spraying it from my Distress ink sprayer just to give it that fabulous little oxidization that these stamp sets have, or these ink pads have. Then I've got this white ink. This comes from Stamping Up. I've had it in my stash for a very long time. I don't even think it's available anymore, but just to give some white splatter. Onto the colouring. This is the MFT Beary Special Birthday stamp, one of the little bears from in there, and I'm doing Copic colouring, starting off with my browns, going in for the darker areas, moving into my mid-tone, and then I go on to my lightest tone after that. Sorry for the lighting. I was doing this last night. I kept meaning to do it during the day, and then the day sort of got further and further on. And so by the time I did it, there wasn't a great deal of natural light. What I've done here is I actually went from my darkest tone to my lightest tone without really noticing, and wondered why it wasn't blending particularly well. Obviously I've noticed that mistake and rectified it. I'm just darkening up those edges a little bit more to get a better blend and a deeper colour on my little bear. There are multiple tutorials online for some fantastic Copic colouring. I wing it. I tend to try a 3 to 4 blend, colour blend, and I just work it backwards and forwards. I'm using the Neena Solar White £180 cardstock which I find is really good with Copic markers. And when I stamped my bear, I did it in Momento Tuxedo black ink, as it's a Copic safe ink and it's not going to bleed. So I'm now moving on to the cake, and I make a bit of a mistake here. I start colouring in the actual cake bit rather than the icing. Just spotted it there, look. So I didn't want to have to recolour the entire bear, so I stamped out the cake part of the image again. And now I'm going back in. I've started with the cake section so that I could actually get on and do the icing and not make the same mistake again. Just going in with some light E shades. Again, I don't really worry too much about a light source, as long as there's some tone. Obviously there are places where the shadows would be darker and they're quite easy to see. But it's a small image and I'm not trying to be Van Gogh, so it works for me. So I've used the coordinating die set to cut out both those images, and now because I want to stick that cake back onto the first image, I'm just cutting it on the black line around the cake part that attaches to the bear. Bit of fussy cutting, and then it'll sit on top. Obviously have to finish off colouring because there's always those little bits you miss that you might not always notice. Right, now it's ready to assemble everything. Taking my word die cut now out of that negative space, and now this is where I go to put it on my background, and I realise that the two colours on top of each other just blend in too much, so I've decided to add an underlay, a bit of a shadow. So I've gone for, it's Simon Says Stamp's Smoke Grey cardstock, but once I actually do it I realised it just doesn't look right. Next to the bear, who's got a white outline, it doesn't work, so I've moved on to just white card. And I feel like that gives the whole thing a much better pop, fits in with the white outline that I've got going on with the bear. And also when I come to assemble the card in a minute, I'm going to put the frame back on, and that's also white. I'm now using my stamp, I can't think of the name of that either, Misty, says so, look, right on there. My Misty stamp positioner, I've got the large one, which is too large to fit under my recording area. So I am stamping that in Versafine Onyx black ink. It's nice and crisp. That stamp set is the coordinating one to the Big U die, which is the Hello You stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. I've put the back panel and the frame back together, and I'm just sticking a bit of tape onto the back so that it's easier for me to actually mount it onto my card base all in one piece, rather than doing it a flimsy little frame and then trying to get the rest of the stuff in. I'm using Ranger's Matte Multi-Matte Medium as my adhesive today. I normally use a 3M ATG gun, but I've run out of tape and need to buy some more. So this actually worked quite well because it gave me a little bit of wriggle room in order to get it aligned nicely. So there we go, there's my card base. Now just to assemble my little bear and his cake. So I'm popping the second cake on, which actually it works quite nicely. You can't tell the mistake I've made. So that's always good. There's always a way to cover up these things so that you don't have to redo everything. Just using that multi-medium matte adhesive again to mount. It's not really a shadow now, is it, with it being white? But the little background piece onto my U. It was a bit hard to know where to put the glue because obviously they're not on top of each other, so I did the top part of the glue afterwards. Going to use my reverse tweezers. These are an absolute lifesaver in my craft room. They just make putting things down so much easier. my acrylic block just to sit on that word, make sure it sticks, while I move on to putting some 3M foam tape onto my little bear so that he is stood up a little bit rather than being flat. Like a little bit of dimension on my cards. Again, those reverse tweezers come in very handy. So he's pretty much finished, just the finishing touches. I'm using a black gel pen just to colour in the eyes and nose. They could just give it a little bit of shine. And then I've got some clear Wink of Stela, which is just going to give me a subtle shimmer on the layers of the icing. And then these are quite new to me. They've been around for a long time, but I've only recently got them. But these are the Nevo drops. And I've got, this one's just gloss white. And then I've got a clear one as well, which I'm going to use to put on the icing of the cake and his little nose. And this will dry completely clear. And then that colour and even that shimmer from the Wink of Stela, once it's dry, shines through. And even trying to put it on the tiniest little spots of candles at the top. You'd think I was finished, but no, I decided to go back in with the Wink of Stela just to add some shimmer to the white behind the U, and then just because I could, I put some all the way around the white frame as well. Unfortunately, the Wink of Stela really does not show up very well on the video because it's such a gentle shimmer. It's not quite like glitter. It really is like a little glistening. So there's a little bit of a close-up. There you have it. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye.